Transnet has started the process of teaming up with the private sector and the company releasing a draft network statement which details how the SOE is to embrace the private sector as a partner for delivery in its rail network across the country. And also in his weekly newsletter 2 weeks ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa saying Transnet had also reduced the congestion that we saw playing out at the ports. Let's speak to Bessie Mabunda, Transnet's Freight Rail Acting General Manager of Rail Network and Capital Projects, who joins us live now. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's start with the significance of this particular moment for Transnet. I mean, this public-private partnership has been talked about for quite some time now.
Good evening and good evening to your viewers. Yes, so from a rail reform point of view, I mean, the reform process has been on the go for quite a number of years. And with the publishing of the network statement, it becomes a very critical phase of the program that will then allow for open access and will allow third parties onto the freight rail network. So this is really something that we're celebrating from a Transnet point of view. And I think from a country point of view, it is basically a fruition of some of the regulatory instruments that we have seen, which is the National Rail Policy, the ERT bill, as well as the implementation framework, which is the Freight Logistic Roadmap.
And some, of course, say that this is a step in the right direction, especially for a company like yourselves that has been, struggling in some of these departments for quite some time. But others are saying that, for example, in the logistics industry, they say that the rail network has been neglected and now there's a maintenance backlog, which might mean that the cost might have to be passed on to some of the private sector players. I wonder then, when it comes to Transnet, how do you see this one play out?
Yeah, thanks for that. I don't think it is actually accurate to say that the rail network has been neglected. So you would know that Transnet as a state-owned entity, being an SOC, means that it is 100% fully responsible to maintain the network, to run its operations, utilizing its own funds. So this is something that it has been doing for years. In the recent past, there has been some challenges in terms of from a financial point of view that has led to a situation where, because of prioritization, we have not necessarily spent enough money on maintaining the network. And yes, there has been some parts of the network that have deteriorated as a result. But one of the key things that has actually exacerbated the situation and has led to further deterioration is actually the serious security issue that we are facing as a country in general, where theft and vandalism of the infrastructure has led to a serious erosion in capacity and therefore what we then see as the current state of the network.
And would you say, I'm going to get to theft and vandalism in just a moment, but would you say, though, that some of the challenges around the deterioration, you are now in a better position to be able to take care of, especially financially?
Yeah, so with setting up an infrastructure manager, as is being done, obviously, from a government point of view, they see the IM as a custodian, a manager of the network, and the IM is supposed to be self-sustainable and able to fully fund its operations from the tariff that it is then going to get from the industry. Now, with the tariff, the way that we have done it and we've set it up, and this has been benchmarked globally and even locally. So this methodology that we are proposing, it is something that is well known and that is used in most infrastructure industries. So if we do get it right, that the tariff is actually set at the right level, you will then find that the IM is then able to secure the funds that it needs in full, not only to run the operations, but also to restore the network to the level that it should be, that will ensure that it is safe, reliable, and available to support industry's need from a logistics point of view.
So two questions arise from that. The first one then, some of the players are saying that the proposed tariffs are simply unaffordable.
Yeah, so that's a very difficult question because at the end of the day, we have an infrastructure that has been basically entrusted into the care of the infrastructure manager. And the infrastructure manager has a responsibility to ensure that that network not only can it actually operate today and support the logistics requirement of today's economy, it is a network that needs to also be sustainable going into the future. So if we then take a short-term view of this and do not necessarily fund the infrastructure at the level that it actually requires, we will unfortunately end up with an infrastructure that over time it continues to deteriorate. And if that happens, it actually means from a logistic point of view, less and less volumes are able move on our rail, and these volumes will therefore move to road. So the implications or the consequences of not funding the network at the level that it requires, it really is far beyond just impacting the rail. It will also impact the economy, but it will also impact the communities through which most of our country's roads move, because there will then be trucks on the road, and we know the challenges that brings with it.
So how then do you see this one play out? Because you will have some of the players who are saying that if then they have to come in, the tariffs are high, they themselves are struggling in business, and then they may not be able to do this. And if the infrastructure is not already there and they now have to try and support the efforts, that for them becomes a mammoth task and a tall order.
Yeah, so in other countries, and actually most countries where this kind of rail reform has been implemented, what you find is that the state actually comes in and provides grant funding to ensure that the tariffs are kept at an affordable level, and to also close any shortfalls that the IM may have in support of ensuring that the country's network, from a rail point of view, is kept at the standard that the economy actually requires. So in our case, we also may need to lean somewhat on government in terms of supporting. But at the end of the day, the infrastructure from a rail point of view, the freight rail network, requires the level of funding that we have calculated. It is not an easy task to actually do this kind of calculations and understand in full what the network actually needs financially. So the investment, it is a true reflection of what the network requires. Whether or not the actual funding is a combination of tariff and excess charges that we pass on to the train operating companies, and a combination of some support from the state, that is something that still needs to be ventilated through the process that we are on. So we are hoping that if affordability really from a country point of view, it becomes a big challenge, this is something that the government will be willing to come on board and have those discussions with us, so that we can then see how best to support the rail network of this country.
How willing is government, though, especially when, one thinks back to what the finance minister had to say, that there would be no further support, but the company needs to do all it can in order to be able to turn a corner?
At the end of the day, the reason why we're even going for the separation of infrastructure from operations is to actually move away from the accountability in full of the rail network lying on a company, being a Transnet. So the first phase of this is the separation that you are seeing that will still remain within Transnet. But the future end state is seen as in the infrastructure manager will become what is called a state rail infrastructure manager, which is outside of a company of a Transnet. So in my view, just as we have other infrastructure in this country, and a good example being road, which facilitates a lot of logistics in this country, moving goods from inland to the ports, the rail network is very much similar. It is a logistics system that definitely needs to be supported for the greater good of the country. So in the conversations that we've had with parts of government, there has been a willingness to discuss, a willingness to collaborate, and also an understanding that this open access also brings with it collaboration with private sector as well for some investment onto the network through concessioning or reduced tariff. Private sector can also bring in investment into the network. So it is not something that the IM is saying we can do it on our own. This is definitely something that requires collaboration on a bigger scale than just one entity.
And especially even in the issue around the vandalism as well as the theft of infrastructure there. But there's something else before I let you go that I'd like us to get an update on. The president about 2 weeks ago saying that, the company had achieved about a 45% reduction in vessels anchored outside the port of Durban and 36% reduction in the waiting time anchor container vessels. What's the latest when it comes to what is taking place at the ports?
Okay, so the ports, I mean, you would have seen, especially just before the festive season last year, there were a lot of delays that were being experienced, a lot of queuing, not only from a truck inland point of view, but also in terms of vessel on the seaside. And that has definitely improved. I mean, those days that have been shared by the president, I'm sure those were checked from a TNPA or Transnet National Ports Authority point of view. So those will be the facts as we have on the table. But definitely there has been a marked improvement from a port in terms of the vessel waiting time, in terms of how quickly shipments are handled at the port. So definitely we are seeing a turnaround in that space.
I know that I've taken you out of rail and put you in the ports, which is something that's not your department. But thank you so much for answering the question and giving us a sense of how things are looking. Do appreciate your time. That was Bessie Mabunda, Transnet Freight Rail Acting General Manager of Rail Network and Capital Projects.